Winter is when the High Weald reveals a side most people never see. After weeks of rain, hidden streams wake up, sandstone ravines start to flow, and woodland paths lead to waterfalls that simply don't exist for most of the year. East Sussex isn't known for waterfalls, and that's exactly why so many of these places are overlooked. Some are well known by name, others are barely marked on maps, but all of them are seasonal, fleeting, and easy to miss unless you're out here in the wettest months. Over the past few weeks, I've been exploring hidden stream valleys across the High Weald, places like Beckley Woods, Ashdown Forest, Marline Valley, Crowhurst, and the edges of Hastings itself, following water rather than paths, and revisiting locations that only come alive after sustained rain. In this film, I'll show you a selection of some of the most interesting woodland waterfalls I've found so far. Some familiar, some less so, and explain why winter is the only time you'll ever see them like this. And this is only part of the story. There are more waterfalls out there than I can cover in one film, and the list is still growing. Hidden within Beckley Woods, in an area known as Waterfall Wood, this is one of the most reliable woodland waterfalls in the High Weald. The main fall drops over a mossy sandstone ledge into a shallow pool, and after sustained rain, the flow spreads wide across the rock face rather than forming a single narrow channel. In drier periods, it quietens quickly, which is why timing here matters. What makes this spot interesting is that it isn't just one waterfall. Along the same stretch of stream are several smaller cascades and stepfalls, easy to miss unless you know they're there, and constantly changing with the seasons. It's ancient woodland, and conditions underfoot can be muddy and slippery year-round. But when the water is moving, this small valley gives a good sense of how many hidden waterfalls the High Weald still holds. Mungo's waterfall is one of the most elusive waterfalls in Ashdown Forest. It sits tucked into a steep, narrow ravine and only reveals itself properly after sustained heavy rain. For much of the year, this stream can be completely dry, which is why visits outside wet winter conditions often end with nothing to see. But after prolonged rainfall, water sheds quickly off the sandstone and clay above, gathering momentum before splitting into strands as it drops over the ledge into a small plunge pool below. When it's flowing, the waterfall is brief but energetic, a short-lived feature that feels more like an event than a fixed landmark. It's a reminder that many Ashdown Forest waterfalls are entirely seasonal and only exist for a short window when conditions are right. From Mungo's, it's a short walk along the same stream system to a very different kind of waterfall. The Garden of Eden sits right beside a public footpath, yet it's surprisingly easy to miss unless the water is really moving. After heavy rain, the stream spreads out across layered sandstone, forming a broad, stepped cascade rather than a single vertical drop. What makes this spot interesting is the contrast. It's far more accessible than Mungo's, but just as temporary. Outside wet periods, it quickly shrinks back to a quiet trickle, blending into the woodland and giving little hint of what it can become in winter. It's a good reminder that in Ashdown Forest, waterfalls don't announce themselves. Even the ones you can walk past still depend entirely on timing and rainfall to exist at all. Marline Valley hides more than one waterfall, and the contrast between them tells its own story. One sits on darker algae-coated sandstone with a more enclosed feel and older carvings, cut directly into the rock face, some dating back to the 1930s. It's a reminder that this valley has been explored quietly for generations, even if most people pass above without ever seeing what's below. Further along the same stream is a very different fall, dropping over iron-stained sandstone that glows rust orange after heavy rain. Here, iron-rich water oxidizes as it flows, colouring the rock and giving the waterfall a warmer, almost unreal tone compared to the darker Wealden stone nearby. Both are highly seasonal. Both sit in steep, sheltered ravines, and both only really exist in winter conditions. Together they show how much variety can exist within a single valley, if you're willing to look beyond the obvious paths. Many people think they've seen Old Raw Ghyll when they come across Little Raw Ghyll, a smaller cascade higher up the valley that's far easier to reach and often mistaken for the real thing. Old Raw Ghyll itself lies deeper in the ravine, and historically it was the prize. In Victorian times, this was a well-known local attraction, visited for fresh air, woodland scenery, and the novelty of a proper waterfall so close to Hastings. Today, the setting feels very different. Housing now sits right on the edge of the Ghyll, and years of erosion and landslips have changed the landscape dramatically. Access routes that once existed have been closed off, and the ravine itself is unstable and constantly shifting. After sustained heavy rain, the waterfall still comes alive, but it's no longer a casual destination. Old Raw Ghyll is now one of those places that's well known by name, yet largely hidden from view, and shaped as much by what's happened around it as by the water that still flows through it. Crowhurst is where the High Weald really starts to hide its waterfalls. The landscape here is cut by deep, narrow Ghyll valleys carved into sandstone, and many of the streams running through them aren't shown as streams on OS maps or Google Maps at all. From above, the woodland looks unremarkable, but once you drop into the ravines, the terrain changes completely. Several of the waterfalls I've found here sit deep in these valleys, flowing over stepped sandstone ledges and forming small clusters rather than single dramatic drops. They're easy to miss, highly seasonal, and only reveal themselves after sustained rainfall. Finding them isn't about following paths. It's about reading the landscape, studying contour lines, looking for tight, folded valleys, and understanding how water moves through this terrain has been far more useful than relying on maps alone. Crowhurst may not have the tallest waterfalls in the High Weald, but it quietly holds some of the most hidden, tucked away in Ghylls that most people never see. Dripping Well is one of those waterfalls that most people walk past without ever realising what it can become. For much of the year, it lives up to its name, just a damp rock face and a steady seep emerging from the sandstone beside the path. But after sustained heavy rain, the water pressure builds, and it briefly transforms into a proper waterfall, spilling down the cliff and feeding the stream below. This is a classic High Weald spring, shaped by layered sandstone and clay. Water moves slowly underground for most of the year, then reappears suddenly when conditions are right, turning an unremarkable spot into something far more dramatic. It's small, short-lived, and easy to miss, but that's exactly what makes Dripping Well a good example of how many of the region's waterfalls are seasonal features rather than permanent landmarks. Most of the streams and Ghylls that cut through the High Weald follow the same pattern. They rise quietly in the woodland, run north to south through sandstone ravines, and eventually make their way towards the coast. Ecclesbourne Glen is one of the clearest examples of that journey reaching its end. After prolonged heavy rain, water that has travelled down through the glen emerges at the cliff edge and spills straight over the face, forming one of the largest and most dramatic seasonal waterfalls in the area. This is the wild side of Hastings, a stretch of coastline running alongside Hastings Country Park, where inland geology and coastal erosion meet head-on. The waterfall only exists for a short window, shaped entirely by rainfall, gravity, and the layered sandstone beneath the surface. Seen at the end of the trail, it puts everything before it into context. The hidden woodland, falls, the narrow Ghylls, the quiet ravines, all of them are part of the same system, moving water steadily south until it finally reappears here at the edge of the land. These are just some of the hidden waterfalls that appear across the High Weald when conditions are right. Many only exist for a short time each winter, and there are far more out there than can fit into a single film. If you'd like to explore further, you'll find a link in the description to the full guide, where all the waterfalls featured here, along with many others, are documented with precise locations shared responsibly. If you've enjoyed this film, please consider liking and subscribing. And if you know of any High Weald waterfalls I've missed, leave a comment below. The landscape is still revealing new surprises, and the list is still growing.